like, subscribe, notifications.
Degenesis, KatharSys, is the second of two books that make up the core of the Degenesis role-playing game. The game was published by Six More Vodka out of Germany, and now enjoys an international following in 5 and going on 6 languages. The game itself takes place 500 years in the future, largely in Western and Central Europe as well as Super-Saharan Africa. Humanity faces threats from all sides by hostile alien invaders in the form of exotic mutations, as well as themselves as they have been split into warring clans and cults. Life is nasty, brutish, and very likely short as humanity enters a new dawn. There are a few things I want to point out about this video. This is the second of 3 deep dive videos that I'm doing about Degenesis. The first one covered Primal Punk, the setting book. This second one covers KatharSys, the game's rules and GM guidance book. Incidentally, KatharSys also contains a lot more setting information, and I'll try to cover that as well. The third video will cover artifacts, a further expansion of the rules and setting. I was asked by Six More Vodka to do this series in a promotional capacity, but they were very hands-off as far as content. I will include my honest opinions about this book at the end of the video. This video will only cover Degenesis as it is presented in this book, Degenesis KatharSys. Since its publication, there have been a slew of expansions to the game, large and small, but those are beyond the scope of this video. I touch on the history of Degenesis the game and its setting in my first video, as well as how Degenesis is a free-to-play game. You can actually download virtually all the PDFs for free right now from their website. Printed versions are also available, and they are primo quality. KatharSys is sold as one of 2 core books that always come in a box set. Six More Vodka sells a variety of iterations of this box set, but the default color and configuration is the white Degenesis Rebirth set. As I mentioned in the previous video, the box itself is surprisingly heavy and sturdy, and the books are hefty. The cover board is thick and the pages are stitch bound. The paper is thick and glossy and the colors are clean and sharp. The idea with Degenesis is that you can download the PDFs for free and give the game a try, and if you want to support the small team that is Six More Vodka, you can do so by buying these primo rulebooks. I've included an exclusive discount code in the description below.
Game mechanics. Basic rules.
Degenesis works by way of a D6 dice pool system of 6 attributes and 6 skills under each attribute for a total of 36 skills. The core attributes are body, agility, charisma, intellect, psyche, and instinct, and are paired with their respective skills either alone or combined with another in a so-called combination roll. These skills and combination skills are intended to cover all possible contested actions a character might take in a game. If an action is to be tested, such as in a moment of social interaction or investigation or combat, then you would take the rating of the underlying core attribute plus the rating of the relevant skill. This is called the action number, and it's the number of d6s you get to throw. There are actually all kinds of bonuses and penalties that then modify this base action number before you throw the dice, but the idea is that any die that is 3 or less is a failure, and any that is 4, 5, or 6 is a success. Every challenge has different difficulty ratings. Generally speaking, a routine action only requires 1 success. A challenging one requires 2, and 4 successes would be considered a difficult task. Anything more than that is just that much further out of reach. When there are 6s in a successful roll, you count those as not only successes, but as triggers. Triggers can be used to enhance a narrative roll like investigation, or to activate weapon qualities or add damage in combat. Special powers called potentials can also be activated with triggers. For combo actions, it's usually some form of perception or reaction that comes first, followed by the principal skill. The first roll has to be a success in order to attempt the second roll in these cases, but the triggers from both rolls can stack.
Character creation.
When you start out, you begin with 1 point in every attribute and get to distribute an additional 10 attribute points and 28 skill points. By default, you can't put in more than 2 points into any one core attribute for a total of 3, or 2 into any skill, but the max on these will increase depending on other choices you make in the character creation process. One thing to note here is that you have to choose between focus or primal, and willpower or faith. Between these 2 pairs, you choose one and then the other is cut off for good, which really informs roleplay more than anything. Before distributing points, the first choice you make is that of which culture your character is from. I briefly detail each of the 7 cultures in my previous Degenesis video. Where the rubber hits the road here is with attribute and skill max increases. Obviously, the culture you choose would color your character's backstory in a big way as well. The next big choice is your character's concept. These are presented as 22 different archetypes, each with their own cool symbol. If you roleplay towards this concept in-game, you get to add 2 d6s per day to a roll related to that concept. More importantly, you get another bump in the starting attribute and skill point maximums depending on what you choose. The third and most far-reaching C for you to choose is your cult. Whichever cult you choose will bump up your skill point max for 5 different skills, but will also color your entire roleplay experience by putting you on a cult-specific promotion track and giving you access to certain feats called potentials. There is another layer to all characters called backgrounds. There are 6 of these, and they can each have a rating of 0 to 6. This rating tends to act as a bonus to other action rolls and can also stand as a general indication of reputation in any given domain. You start with 4 points to distribute here, and no background can have more than 3 points at the start. To actually level them up yourself in the course of the game, you have to roleplay deeds and accomplishments that pertain to the background itself. These background ratings can also be reduced in the same way, like through infamous actions and the like. You gain attribute and skill points by spending experience points earned from accomplishing things in the game, something largely up to the GM. Point buying gets more and more expensive as your ratings get higher.
Cult ranks.
One of the perks of buying your way up is that you can unlock higher ranks in your cult, but in all honesty, these ranks are not evenly built. Since Degenesis is a relatively brutal and gritty game, your character has to go through hell to survive and rank up, but higher ranks are not always that rewarding. Within each of the cults, the bonuses at higher ranks range from really great equipment and mechanical bonuses to very narrowly applicable mechanical bonuses to almost nothing at all. Also, some ranks impose duties and responsibilities on your character that may not comport at all with the scenario that your GM and other players have in mind. With that being said, it's common practice within the Degenesis community to focus on the role-playing aspects of higher ranks instead of mechanical perks. Not every bonus can be shown purely in mathematical stats and benefits. Also, there is no expectation in the game to gain cult ranks. They act in some ways as optional entry points into a cult where players can occasionally climb the ladder a little bit over the course of many sessions.
Potentials.
That being said, each cult does offer 6 concrete powers called potentials. You only get 1 at the start, but each one is a potential game changer. Since there are 78 cult-specific and 11 general potentials on offer in the book, I can't really get into the specifics of each, but generally they provide anything from a special attack, defensive power, investigation or persuasion power, or area buffs and debuffs. Just like with leveling up your attributes and skills, leveling up a potential gets increasingly expensive over time. As with cult ranks, potentials are not carefully balanced against one another, but rather show a variety of special effects.
Online creator.
Now is a good time to mention that Degenesis has a completely free online generator that is so convenient that once you use it, there's probably no going back to pencil and paper. At least not when creating your character initially. You have to create an account on the website, but once you do and you log in, the site takes you directly to the character creator and your collection of characters. The biggest selling point of this web app is that it does all the calculations for you. If you choose a culture, concept, or a cult, all the point maximums adjust. Additionally, it accounts for all new features that are introduced in every new supplement. For the record, the creator doesn't limit the amount of money or gear that you start with, so you'll need to consult the rules in your GM to make sure you stay within reason there.
Injury, healing, and death.
There are essentially 3 point pools that track your character's life. Ego represents your mental stability and will to go on. The higher your intelligence plus focus or instinct plus primal skill is, the higher your max ego. A number of enemies in Degenesis actually make mental attacks, and you can lose ego points that way. You can also voluntarily spend ego points to increase your initiative at the start of battle, but those points are precious and hard to recover, and dropping to 0 ego means becoming virtually incapacitated. The second point pool is spore infestation. Spore infestation is humanity's curse. It's impending doom, and in one form or another, it's never far away. Burn, parasites, spore storms, there are dangers aplenty. Fortunately, one's mind is the best defense against spore infestation and the distant powers of the earth chakras. Your spore max depends on how high your psi plus faith or willpower rating doubled is, but that maximum can be reduced when taking on too many spores and making some bad rolls. The last point pool is flesh wounds and trauma, which both pertain to physical injury. Your starting flesh wound maximum depends on your body plus toughness skill rating, and as you take on injury, you mark off these boxes. When they are exhausted, you start marking trauma. Each point of trauma loss brings with it a negative 1d6 to all rolls generally, and when you have marked off your last point of trauma, your character is completely and irreversibly dead. To recover from trauma, you first have to recover all flesh wounds. Without medical help, or things like nanite healing, you recover 1 flesh wound per day, and it takes 10 days to naturally recover from 1 point of trauma. There are many exotic ways in the game to get hurt and die, including the following, which each have their own special mechanics.
Combat.
Combat in Degenesis is relatively brutal and unforgiving. By all accounts, most battles only last a few rounds since lethality is high. Each turn in combat is meant to represent about 4 seconds of real time, and each round starts with an initiative roll. Players first decide if they want to spend up to 3 precious ego points to get more dice to roll on initiative, and their first turn in that action. Then they roll psi plus reaction. The character with the most successes goes first, and in the case of a tie, characters describe and roll on what they do in turn, and the actions happen in-game simultaneously. Interestingly, on your initiative roll, for every 2 triggers that come up, you get an extra action for your turn. This is an extraordinary bonus if you think about it. In a game of such high lethality, an extra action in a turn can mean the entire fight. Once the initiative order is established, each character resolves their action or actions. There are free actions like orders, taunts, or dropping something. Then there is movement. You can move up to 2 meters or about 6 feet without penalty, but if you move further than that on your turn, you get a negative 2d6 on all actions for that turn, but your passive defense goes up by 1. As far as proper actions go in combat, you can either attack with your body or a weapon, and some weapons target psychological damage rather than physical. Or you can opt for active defense. With active defense, you use up your action to roll either mobility, melee, or brawl against the attacker's roll. On a win or a tie, you avoid getting hit, and if you happen to roll 3 or more triggers on this roll, you get a free counterattack that automatically hits.
Weapons and gear.
The weapons and gear in Degenesis are overshadowed by hugely interesting cults and cultures, but they themselves are profoundly interesting and unique. There is cult-specific tech that can only be accessed by cult members and which define the heart and soul of a cult in a lot of cases. Then there are weapons, armor, medicines, oils, spore narcotics hailing from each of the 5 chakras, and legendary items. It would take a whole video to discuss the strange technologies in play and how they all connect to the setting, so for this video, I'll just cover how the stats work. Just as a preamble, it's worth mentioning that all technology in the setting is divided into 6 tech levels. Let's take a look at rifles. Caliber here really means ammo type, which isn't always a caliber. One of the punishing things about Degenesis is that there are 18 types of ammo floating around in the world, ranging from arrows to bullets to high-tech E-cubes, each worth a fortune. Procuring ammo and the right kind of ammo is difficult, which means that every shot counts. Handling denotes any bonuses or penalties you have just for using it in combat. Distance refers to the maximum number of meters that the weapon is effective without penalty. Any attempt to hit something beyond the effective range levies a negative 4d or minus 4d6s to an attack roll. The second number, if listed, means beyond that range you suffer a negative 8d penalty. Damage refers to the number of flesh wound points you inflict on an enemy if you get the hit. Their incoming damage is always reduced by their armor rating if they happen to be wearing any, and if it doesn't say otherwise. Damage can be increased by triggers and potentials, if any, and the sum of your body plus force skill rating defines the base F in melee weapon damage. Mag here is short for magazine, which is really capacity since not all weapons have a magazine. Anytime you have to reload in the middle of combat, it requires an entire action unless otherwise stated. If you need to switch to another weapon, by the way, you take a negative 2d penalty to the following action. Qualities are where things get quite interesting. The book lists 29 different weapon qualities, and each carries some kind of mechanical or quasi-mechanical feature. Encumbrance of all of your gear is added up and compared to your body plus force skill rating. If the encumbrance value is equal to or lower, then you can carry your stuff around no problem. If the encumbrance is higher, then you suffer a penalty to all action rolls equal to the difference between your force and total encumbrance. Tech level is a broadly defined feature that really comes more into play if your character is out doing salvage. There is in fact a whole series of mechanics intended for resolving how much scrap you can salvage in an area per day and what its tech level is. It's worth mentioning that the scrap rules sort of segue into crafting mechanics where you can combine fungible scrap into better scrap at higher tech levels. sort of like Minecraft or something. Slots refer to the amount of augmentation you can make to the item. There's a whole section that details different modifications that you can make to different kinds of equipment, and each of those augments requires a certain number of slots. For most rifles, you can spend 1 slot to either change the caliber, add a sight, expand the magazine, or add a blade to the end. Value is a general price stated in both dinars, which are big golden coins issued by the Bank of Commerce in Africa, and chronicler drafts, or CDs, which are merely printed by chroniclers. These two are the currencies of Degenesis and have a 1-to-1 exchange rate. Resource value refers to just how rare or hard it is to get that item in any particular cult. Generally speaking, if your character's resource rating is higher than the items, then you have access to it. But items with resource 5 or 6 are still hard to get, even if you have the resource rating for it. The cult listed for an item means that it is an item restricted to members of that cult. There are always exceptions, but the book states that cults are very possessive of their signature gear, so that's something to keep in mind as both the GM or as a player. The primer in Degenesis manifests in 5 different forms from 5 different impact craters, but these are more than just craters. The so-called earth chakras are sort of mystical center points that happen to correspond to 5 major chakras of the human body, and each of these craters, as well as the mother spore fields that have spread around them, create 5 different unique spore types. If all goes well for the primer, a spore pod or cusp is created, which releases spores that either infect humans directly or small creatures that in turn infect humans. Any infected humans who then procreate actually give birth to a psychonaut or Homo Degenesis, essentially a high-powered post-human mutant of one sort or another. But when that spore cusp is still maturing, it can be harvested and sold as a drug, generally referred to as burn. The cusp comes as a paper-thin sort of shell that is filled with spore. A burner pokes a hole in it and squeezes the spores directly into their lungs. The intoxication depends on where the cusp was harvested from, and interestingly, there are no reliable indicators on the cusp itself. You never know what you're going to get. There are 6 types of burn, each conferring a mechanical bonus or penalty. Depending on the potency, either weak or some random level of strong, the character takes on spore infestation, which can of course lead to total loss of character once infestation passes a threshold. Burn does not work in Africa. Anytime inhaling it outside of the European continent, a character will only experience achiness and dizziness.
Clans.
One of the 13 playable cults, the Clanners, are actually a huge plurality of smaller, less defined societies that you can choose from. Clanners are supposed to be smaller incorporations of people across the land who aren't as established or protected as the other 12 cults, but from a gameplay perspective, they are no less capable or interesting. The book KatharSys offers a dizzying 21 different illustrated example clans to choose from, and also provided clan generator that comes in the form of 6d6 tables if you want to come up with one of your own. Even if your party doesn't play as a clanner, the history, politics, and behavior of the clans can be as important to the world as the primer and the other cults.
Cockroaches.
Utterly vile and bestial raiders, who seem to exist only to kill and multiply, and who eat their own fallen ones with the belief that they can carry on the spirit of their comrades. They mate their females with imprisoned kings, who are overly large members of the clan locked away in the deepest of their subterranean vaults.
Pheromancers.
A recently freed class of slaves who once worked for a sort of doomsday overlord clan called the Meccans. Pheromancers barely know what to do with their newfound freedom in the city of Nilpelia, and they wield giant weapons called pneumohammers.
Meccans.
Fallen from grace by a Pheromancer uprising, these Freon punk slave masters, if you please, now just raid smaller settlements in the Remain region, stealing children and forcing their pathetic will on the weak and unprotected.
Phosphorites.
These are the distant descendants of Recombination Group employees who holed up in bunkers for as long as they could. They basically went feral in those bunkers, making a ritual out of smearing themselves with shimmering phosphorus pigments and wielding phosphor launchers. They represent a scourge to civilized society, with a price on each of their heads.
Inamoy.
A single convoy of gigantic vehicles that link up into a sort of fortress. Everywhere they stop, their mobile town becomes a marketplace of knowledge, books, technology, and artifacts. They defend the weak wherever they can, and will one day serve a centralized government, if it ever forms.
Stukov nomads.
Extremely reclusive people living in the Stukov Desert of northern Franca. They are masters of survival in a zone riddled with deadly dust worms, scorpions, and husk spiders. They keep to themselves, but are known to trade valuable venoms and other commodities derived from the desert fauna.
Exalters.
The city of Exalt fell during the City Wars, but was quietly resurrected by the few remaining survivors. They accepted outsiders into their fortified ruins, but maintained their own bloodline. Deep in the labyrinths, some of them can access high-tech, hidden technologies.
Storskis.
A clan entirely dedicated to the construction, operation, and maintenance of trains. The most important train line runs between two needle towers, chromium and iridium, and contain bordellos, manufactories, and casinos. Some train cars can only be accessed by the chroniclers.
Corpse eaters.
These unfortunate folks are possessed by a parasitic tapeworm that infests the bloodstream, turning them into feral cannibals. Salt wards them, but there doesn't seem to be any way to fully eradicate the worm from the environment.
Resistance.
In the Franken region, there is a network of survivors whose ultimate goal is to restore bygone art, culture, and literature. They live on boats where termites, ants, and beetles cannot reach them, and restore humanity's past, one recovered painting at a time.
Pandorians.
It's said in the book that all clanners are human, but this one stretches the claim to its breaking point. Pandorians are the product of the Pandora chakra, walking genetic breeding grounds for new mutations and adaptations. They're so gross that you can easily get your melee weapon stuck in one when you hit it, and trigger a spore burst at the same time.
Garganti.
Stoic, dour drivers of the mammoths, they've wandered Borca, Pollen, and Balkan for centuries. They have a culture of hospitality that must not be violated at any cost, since their need for retribution is as fierce as their stern politeness.
Usudi.
People in the Carpathians who don't plug their ears in time will be overcome by the hypnotic vibrations of Usud and converted into these violent, raging, hive-minded drones. They always return to their home settlement, changed and murderous.
Voivodules.
A recent usurper named Karakan has upset centuries of uneasy trust between the voivodes, or little kingdoms in the Balkan. Everything in the region is now in flux as these people of proud tradition have to either unite against an outsider or tear each other apart.
Matadors.
The bullfighters of the setting travel to Africa and fight all kinds of large animals in the arena. They have a sterling reputation for honesty and integrity, but are in fact a clan of spies and cutthroats who serve themselves as much as their brethren back in Hyperspania.
Corredores.
The backbone of the Hyperspanian resistance against African colonizers and slavers, these fighters obey Pregnoctics, the psychonauts of Mirar who can see the future. Their whole existence is fighting invaders and protecting the so-called Sabias, or chosen prognosticators.
Flayers.
Repentant murderers and rapists occasionally choose to pick up a whip and travel from town to town in Purgare, mutilating themselves and preaching enlightenment. For whatever reason, they inspire townfolk, often to the point where the Anabaptist authorities can't drive them away without risking revolt.
Adriani.
The older generation of this Adriatic Basin peoples aspires to be like the Mohammedans in culture and in practice, whereas the younger generations aspire to be like the Anabaptists with all of their traditions. There's no easy path forward for the Adriani.
Romanos.
Decadent raiders of Roma who give themselves ridiculous titles and wear grandiose costumery in the dust of ruined palaces. They are closely associated with the pirate society of Corpse and the illicit sale of the continent's cultural treasures to Africa.
Masai.
Hardened guides and scouts of the African psychovore jungles, they are not immune to the rays, but they are savvy in avoiding it. They are far removed from cities and offered their services as guides and hunters of dangerous animals who may be terrorizing a village.
Shabbath.
Descendants of science vessels that became overtaken by the psychovore in one of Africa's Great Lakes, this clan makes trapping and showcasing exotic discordance creatures a complete way of life. After capturing the bizarre creatures in glass tanks, they show them in nearby towns and villages. Occasionally, their traps catch something far more important.
Enemies.
Clearly, some of these clans don't really function as playable clans, but are rather exclusively human or almost human enemies for players to face. But the book repeatedly stresses that the GM needs to keep enemies interesting. To help with that task, they offer a number of wildly different potential foes.
Beasts.
The exotic, often grotesque beasts of Degenesis each come with an origin that is woven tightly into the setting. The book offers some exotic mechanics for how each of these characters can kill you, and in some cases how to harvest them for valuable medicines and other substances. As with the illustrations in all the Degenesis books, these images really sell the creatures visually.
AMSUMOS.
AMSUMOS are the product of the tail end of the bygone era, where machines were built to police the population and detain suspects. After the Eschaton, they either ran out of energy or figured out a way to sustain themselves, but they were all corrupted by the 2 to the power of the 16 virus. Now, for the most part, they are extremely volatile and dangerous and do not respond to any kind of reason. Generally speaking, they have a ton of armor, extremely high perception, and can kill you in about 2 hits. Sometimes they travel in packs.
Sleepers.
When Recombination Group cryogenically froze people before the Eschaton, they had a plan of waking up some of them at 100-year intervals and releasing them to the surface to reform a new society. Those chosen to do so were highly trained soldiers and spies, their bloodstream coursing with nanites that gave them the ability to heal and regenerate at inhuman rates. And due to their extreme, no point of return indoctrination, they could be anywhere and will do anything to complete their objective. While some of them are openly violent, they are all trying to infiltrate clans and cults and mold them to their own designs with deception, subterfuge, and assassination. They often have access to level 5 tech and occasionally level 6 Wonderland devices.
Marauders.
Marauders are referred to in the setting book Primal Punk essentially as demigods, visiting the plane of Earth from some unknown realm. As revealed in KatharSys, the Marauders were merely once human, but have been granted a sort of perverse immortality through nanotechnology. The same nanites that help sleepers regenerate and heal quickly are what give Marauders their super speed and magic-like powers. The book lists 7 named Marauders, each of whom is tied to a region or a cult in some way, but there are more than just these 7. Marauders come in essentially 3 flavors, ranging from creature to guardian to those who have lived so long that they fancy themselves as gods worthy of worship. All of them, even the divines, need the nanites found in the blood of sleepers to survive.
Homo Degenesis.
Psychonauts are born near spore fields or as a child of a leperos. They start off as normal babies, but after a few years they start to exhibit signs of being something other than human. It's never long before they leave their family and walk off into the wilds, where they fully manifest into one of 5 types of psychonauts, depending on which Earth chakra they were born into. In game terms, a psychonaut is a powerful mutant with semi-magical powers called phenomena, but they have their limitations in the form of their spore infestation. They often have to spend spore infestation in order to perform a phenomenon, and their enemies can use sepsis inhibitors like EX aerosol to reduce their spore value and whittle them down to dried out humanoids with almost no powers at all. There are 4 primal phenomena common to all psychonauts, but they are intentionally somewhat vague so that GMs can change the small details and keep players interested and engaged. That being said, each psychonaut also comes with 5 to 8 specific phenomena that are pretty specific and have detailed mechanical costs and effects.
Biokinetics.
Biokinetics come from the Earth chakra of Pandora in pollen, as well as the mother spore fields that surround it. They are solitary hunters who can reform their bodies with mere thought, and like most phenomena, theirs costs overload points, which are bought with spore infestation points. The phenomena of the biokinetics are largely combat powers.
Dushani.
Dushani come from the Earth chakra of Usud in Balkan, as well as its surrounding mother spore fields. They wield the power of sound as a means of shaping matter and minds. They aren't always hostile, but one of their overlord objectives is to clear the way for the vibrations of their higher self, the Eidolon.
Pheromancers.
Pheromancers come from the Earth chakra of Sufferance in Franca, as well as its surrounding mother spore fields. Their powers are spread and administered by pheromones in the air, and they resemble a hive of insects. They don't really collectively hate humanity as much as they generally feel that the world should be under the influence of the hive mind.
Pregnoctics.
Pregnoctics come from the Earth chakra of Mirar in Hyperspania, as well as its nearby mother spore fields. They possess the ability to see the future and in some cases rewind time. As they mature, they grow a 3rd eye in their forehead and no longer need their 2 original eyes. Among the psychonauts, they are the least overtly hostile to humans and in some cases have formally helped them in various struggles.
Psychokinetics.
Psychokinetics come from the Earth chakra of Nox and Pagare. They wield sort of anti-Newtonian powers that bend energy, matter, and space. Like most of the other psychonauts, they are utterly nihilistic towards humanity and have the ability to drain the life essence from entire villages to increase their own strange powers. The GM section of KatharSys tries to identify the key elements of a good campaign. Since Degenesis is more of a traditionally structured RPG where the GM plans the outline and NPCs in the adventure, there is a lot of weight on the GM to structure the story. One of the most interesting passages in this section I thought was the one that stresses how Names are important. The idea is that the setting demands a certain amount of seriousness and, for lack of a better word, verisimilitude at the table. The book doesn't explicitly say so, but this section essentially requires that all aspects of the setting be taken seriously. Beyond that, the chapter explains different sources of conflict very well, providing 5 major foundations for an adventure or campaign. There is a brief section with 15 different plot hooks that you can get started with, and it's right about here that you realize how vast the tapestry of the setting is. And finally, there is a sample scenario called Embargo, laid out with NPCs and story points and encounters. The intercult and political intrigue in this scenario is relatively simple and kept to a minimum since it's intended for beginner players. Alright, so here are my thoughts on KatharSys. I found the cult rank upgrades to be a bit uneven. Since XP is hard fought in this game and surviving a game session can be daunting, spending that XP on ranks that often don't yield any immediate benefits is not appealing. It would seem that in most cases, the GM would have to go out of their way to have a rank upgrade come into play in-game. That being said, from a rules perspective, this game really shines in its potentials and gear, both of which are tightly woven into the setting. Every one of the potentials is highly applicable in gameplay and can vary quite a bit from each other. And the same goes for the many strange cult and legendary items your character might come across. And if you consider the 44 different phenomena that the Psychonauts might wield, there is a lot of potential emergent gameplay that can be born from the mechanics. The PDFs are free. The books are super deluxe, and it's nothing short of a privilege to own them, but you can grab the PDF for KatharSys and all the Degenesis books and expansions for free. If you ever decide to commit to getting the books, just make sure to use the discount code in the video description below. The online character creator removes all the crunch from rolling up a character. I'd say that the one drawback is that it ends up producing a downloadable PDF that has stats and gear sort of hard-coded onto the page, if you decided to print it out. The solution there would be to use the website to create the character, then just transcribe the info onto a physical page with a pencil. That's still a lot faster than figuring it all out analog. The artwork is something Degenesis is known for, and it's just completely full throttle in this book. The hyper-realism in the portraits and scenes breathes a life into the setting that really sticks in the mind and lights the imagination. The deadliness of the setting is something that appeals to me. When enemies can debilitate or kill you with a few hits, it makes combat something you want to avoid, and if it does happen, it's short. It also makes battles rare and therefore more exciting. By extension, I also like how scarce good items are. Even bullets are scarce. So as a GM, if you reward your players with something as simple as a box of bullets, it could feel like a huge boon. Let's just hope it's the right caliber. Thanks as always for watching. This is Dave signing off. See ya.